Hey everyone, thank you all so much for being here so I can tell you about our fight for science in Louisiana and across the country. So I grew up in Louisiana, and unfortunately my state has an addiction to creationism. In 1987, the Supreme Court threw out our first creationism law in the Edwards versus Aguilar case. But since 2008, we passed a new one, the misnamed and misguided Louisiana Science Education Act, and it makes us repeat offenders. So, I won't lie, it's a really clever piece of legislation. It never once mentions creationism or its follow-up, intelligent design creationism. Instead, it just simply allows supplemental materials to be brought into public school classes to critique evidence-based science, like evolution and climate change and cloning and the origin of life. That's what needs critiquing. Not all of science, but just things like evolution. And so it does this because it's dodging these court rulings that say creationism is not allowed in science classes, intelligent design creationism is not allowed in science classes. And by the way, intelligent design was thrown out in 2005 in the Kitzmiller versus Dover case, and was established by Judge John Jones, who was a Bush-appointed judge, that intelligent design is just creationism dressed up to look like science, but it's still equally unconstitutional. And so throughout this bill and all the talking points of this bill, its proponents say it's about critical thinking. That this is about thinking critically to critique science. It'll make students smarter. And we all like critical thinking. Critical thinking is wonderful. But you don't need a law to allow critical thinking to happen. If a teacher wants to bring in good supplemental materials, they can just do that. The only reason for a law is if you want to sneak in non-science and have legal protection for it and bring that into the science classroom. And so make no mistake, this law is a creationism law. Besides that, it's unnecessary unless you want to sneak non-science into the classroom. When the law was first introduced by Senator Ben Nevers, a Louisiana legislator, he let the cat out of the bag. And he said, the family forum, a local religious right group, who, by the way, claims to have drafted and promoted this law, wanted the law so creationism could be taught in public schools. The sponsor of this bill said it straight out. And Governor Bobby Jindal, a couple months ago now, said on NBC News on Education Nation, he said, quote, that when he was asked about this law and creationism in public schools, we have what's called the Science Education Act that says if a teacher wants to supplement these materials, if the school board's okay with that, if the state school board's okay with that, they can supplement those materials. I've got no problem if a school board, a local school board, says we want to teach our kids about creationism, that some people have these beliefs as well. Let's teach them intelligent design. So he said straight out what this law is for. So despite all this talk about critical thinking, academic freedom, all these things that these creationist defenders bring out, we know exactly what it's for. And when the Louisiana State Board of Education originally wrote the rules surrounding this law, they knew what it was for and tried to ban creationism and intelligent design. They had a specific rule that would ban it. The creationists went berserk and actually got that scrapped. So that was our last protection, and it's gone. And so the only people who want this law also are religious right groups focused on the family affiliates. The Discovery Institute in Seattle, it's a national creationist think tank that takes millions of dollars a year. They say they're doing research, it's really all to pay for their salaries. But they take in millions of dollars every year and use it to promote creationism around the country. And so despite all this talk again about critical thinking, it's not about critical thinking. It's about sneaking creationism into the class. And creationism is not science. It does not meet the standards for science. Science is simply an explanation of the natural world. We can test this explanation. We can repeat these tests. There's specific conditions when we test it that would prove our experiment false. We'd have to go back to the drawing board. Creationism, on the other hand, meets none of these standards. And if we teach it, we're going to confuse kids about the nature of science and the scientific method. And honestly, it's going to really harm them in all their future scientific endeavors, whether it's biology, chemistry, physics. If you don't understand the scientific method and think creationism is equally valid to evolution, then you're going to struggle anywhere the scientific method applies. And so these laws, like the Louisiana Science Education Act, threaten established science. But I don't have to tell you all that, because in Oklahoma, I'm sure many of you know well about these attempts to sneak anti-science in the class. You've got legislators like Sally Kern and Josh Breachin. Yeah, they bring it up each year. And, you know, I have to apologize for something. I go to Rice. It's a very good science school. And y'all have another anti-science politician in Oklahoma right now, Jim Bridenstine, who recently called on the president, Bridenstine, sorry. Yeah, recently called on the president to apologize for funding climate science research. Now, I told you, I go to Rice, I'm really embarrassed to say that Congressman Bridenstine graduated from Rice. So the congressman wants an apology, so I think here's one. So to all the Oklahomans here, I apologize that Congressman Bridenstine didn't learn about the evidence for climate science when he was at Rice, and I wish he had. So we have to fight to prevent the damage these politicians are doing to science, and that's what I've been doing for the last few years. So when I was a senior in high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we had this law, the Louisiana Science Education Act. And for a few years before that, I thought someone was going to stand up. I thought an adult would do it. And I waited a year, and no one did it. I waited another year. No one took on this law. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I said, no one's taking on this law. I'm about to leave state, I think, for college. I don't know what's happening, but this is my last chance to fight for what I know is right. There's not a question. This is a bad law. So I stood up and started leading a repeal of the Louisiana Science Education Act. The first step for me was to find a mentor. And that was Dr. Barbara Forrest, one of the world-renowned experts on creationism and intelligent design, who, luckily for me, lives about 25 minutes from my house down the road in Livingston Parish, which is a local hotbed of creationism. Livingston Parish, by the way, tried to implement the Louisiana Science Education Act, saying it was for, quote, critical thinking and creationism, and one of their school board members was very upset they couldn't find someone with religious beliefs to go teach creationism in the science classroom, and they said they didn't want a court case, but would take one for Jesus, basically. And so that's the atmosphere in Louisiana. I'll show you a few videos later on about some of our legislators. But luckily for me, Dr. Forrest was in Louisiana, and I got in touch with her, and she agreed to help me on this repeal. And the step after that was to find a legislative sponsor of our bill. Now, it was pretty easy for us to know where to go, because when the Louisiana Science Education Act passed, there were only 3 votes against it in the entire Louisiana legislature. So we had a pretty small group of people to go to. And the first person I went to was Senator Karen Carter Peterson, a lawmaker from New Orleans. Got a meeting with her, sat down with her, and I started explaining why this law is bad, and she cut me off and said, you don't need to tell me this. When do we get started? And so we've gone from there. And when we began, everyone told us, again, 3 votes against the law the first time. So everyone told us, you don't have a chance. And they said, why bother? And you know what? That first year, we lost 5-1 in committee. And I'm going to show you a video now of what happened, what we were up against that first year. So this is thankfully retired Senator Julie Quinn, who apparently doesn't like Nobel laureates very much. One sec.
What I think most of the kids here would like to stand for is, if you had asked, would you prohibit
It wasn't what I asked.
I know.
And I am an attorney, and I listen patiently to all the accolades that everyone has behind, all the little letters behind their name, doctor, etc. So as an attorney, I'm asking a question, and I would like an answer to that question. Do you support, since you came to the table, do you support a law that prohibits the teaching of religion in the classroom?
Not in classes like English or history or comparative religions or philosophy class.
So you support the promotion of religion in an English class?
The Bible is always used in most English classes because it's a classic piece of literature.
Okay.
And promotion would be the key word in response.
Yeah.
Promotion would be, just if I can respond,
Go ahead.
did listen patiently, and I appreciate that, Senator Quinn. And the only point I was trying to make is that if you wanted a response to your question, somebody needed to come to the mic so it could be on the record what the response was. And I don't think that any one individual, even Mr. Kopplin, can speak for everyone in the audience, and that probably...
That's kind of why I'm sorry to interrupt, but after listening to everyone, it seemed pretty clear that what they were espousing as a general concept was what they consider religious references based as to creationism not being taught in the classroom. So I was rephrasing it. Then do you support a bill that prohibits the promotion, the teaching of religious beliefs in the classroom?
Well,
they wouldn't even answer that.
Well, they weren't at the table, number one, but I don't think that, the instrument before, Senate Bill 70, deals specifically with creationism in science classes, and that's why you see the plethora of people with little letters little letters behind their name?
Big letters. I wasn't trying to be
Well, I just heard little letters.
respectful.
And I am very respectful of over 40 Nobel laureates. I'm very respectful of the Association of Biology Teachers. I'm very respectful of Louisiana Association of Biology Educators. I'm very respectful of Louisiana Science Teachers Association. I'm very respectful of the American Association of Advancement of Science, and I'm respectful of the American Institute of Biological Sciences, as well as American Society for Cell Biology and the Society for Vertebrate Paleontology. Lastly, the American Association of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. Half of this stuff I can't even enunciate, and yes, they have little, big, medium, and big letters behind their names, and they're all suggesting that we repeal the act.
So that is. So that was Senator Peterson there, who sponsored our bill for us, explaining why we should respect Nobel laureates. I don't know if that wasn't clear to begin with. Apparently it wasn't. And everyone told us, with that kind of legislature in office, why bother? And we lost. And so with Senator Quinn leading the charge, we lost in the 5-1 vote that year. And so we came back the next year. And again, everyone said, well, you saw last year. People who were sitting on the sidelines told me, we know what the vote's going to be. You're going to lose again. And you know what? That year we lost 2-1. And I think I'm going to show you another video from that year. We made some progress. We were no longer doubting little letters. We were now doubting evolution as a whole.
Let me ask you a question. There's not an experiment that you could
yes, there is an
have
experiment
in the classroom that would say, here's Darwin's theory of evolution, and this proves it without a shadow of a doubt.
I will tell you about that. They have done experiments with E. coli bacteria, and they have taken those E. coli and they have taken different containers of them and they froze them in time, so that
how long of time? How long?
They just froze them over generations, like years.
Oh, okay.
But this is an experiment.
Okay.
And so then they let the E. coli that are in the different vials continue to evolve.
Okay.
And then they take this group and they freeze it. And then they take this group and they freeze it. And then you can take all of them over time and compare them. And you can see how the E. coli have changed over time and how they evolved. But what's really interesting...
They evolve into a person?
No, they
okay, I'm just asking how to get there. I'm just trying to figure out how to get there. But go ahead. I mean, so they change.
Person.
I think that's what we're talking about on.
Oh, but that's not what we're talking about.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
We're
I'm just trying to
talking
find
about evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these E.
How we
coli
got here.
So that was last year. And so the good news is, I guess they did evolve a little bit. We only lost 2-1 that year. So that's an improvement. A bunch of senators sat out and weren't willing to vote because they at least weren't willing to vote against what they knew was wrong. And so, again, this year we came back again. Let me show you it seems each year there's something. The Louisiana legislature never disappoints, I think. And so this year we lost 3-2, and it took a turn for the wacky. Here, brace yourself.
Concerned that we might shut off the presentation of ideas by
we have that
prematurely declaring one science or another science as pseudoscience. This doctor practiced in an open circle in a dusty spot. He wore no shoes, was semi-clothed, used a lot of bones that he threw around. I would bet that all of us would agree that his science is a pseudoscience. We would not have respect for his science and the practice of his science. That would concern me, because if we were able to declare what I have verified for myself as something that has some validity to it. I mean, the stuff the man told me about my history.
Yeah.
Yet, if I closed my mind,
Yeah.
when I saw this man in the dust, throwing some bones on the ground, semi-clothed, if I had closed him off and just said, that's not science, I'm not going to see this doctor, I would have shut off a very good experience for myself, and actually would not have discovered some things that he told me about what I needed to go and do when I got home to see my doctor.
So, apparently, it's not just evolution and climate change that are controversial now, it's now all of modern medicine. So, the coalition we built in this fight to take down this law is like none other in the world. We have 78 Nobel laureates, major science organizations, thousands of clergy members, the full city council of New Orleans. The Orleans Parish School Board banned creationism in their classes because of this law. We've managed to protect Louisiana's biology textbooks now 4 times because they've tried to throw them out 4 times since 2010, and we've stopped them every time so far. We've done incredible work, but still, in the face of what we just saw, people are asking us, why do you keep fighting? And we fight because we need a scientific revolution. We need a second giant leap, is what I'm calling for. But, yeah. But before I get there, I want to tell you a little bit about how our fight's taken a wrong turn in Louisiana. Because we thought Governor Jindal had done all he could do to harm science education with the creationism law. You'd think that, right? It's not much more past that. We were wrong. You could outright fund creationist schools with public money. We passed a school voucher program that's giving millions of dollars to creationist schools across the state. So originally, we documented 20 private schools that were advertising on their websites that students were having to defend creationism against traditional scientific theory, that scientists were, quote, sinful men. That was my favorite. Scientists are sinful men when they try and say the Earth is millions of years old. And so we found that there's apparently 1,300 students and at least 20 schools, probably a lot more that we didn't know about. These were only the schools that advertised on their website and receiving tens of millions of dollars. After this became public, some schools were teaching the Loch Ness Monster was real, apparently, and disproved evolution. After this became public, they reduced it to about $4 million the first year and have been expanding that since. But schools across the country are doing this. This isn't just in Louisiana. In Oklahoma, there's also a voucher program, much smaller than Louisiana's, luckily. But there's still a voucher program. And let me give you an example of an Oklahoma school. Life Christian Academy is being funded by public money. It uses the creationist Bob Jones curriculum. It teaches evolution, but only in history class, where students are taught to evaluate the theory of evolution and its flaws. And so this is funded by public money. And we found hundreds of schools, over 300 across the country. And this is likely the tip of the iceberg, because these are only the schools that are just completely blatant about it. They're probably receiving hundreds of millions in public dollars and teaching that evolution is the way of the heathen. There's schools in Indiana funded by public money that bring their kids down to Kentucky to the Creation Museum itself. We think there's some schools in Louisiana that might bring them to the Dallas Creation Museum too. So maybe Louisiana matches Indiana now. But these schools, this is it's an American problem, and there's creationism laws, there's school vouchers, and this all needs to stop. And so that's where we get into the science revolution. We need to be teaching evidence-based science. We need to be funding evidence-based science. And we need to not be giving millions in public dollars to schools that teach the Earth is 6,000 years old. And again, this isn't going to be easy because we're up against people like Senator Walsworth, who thinks that evolution says E. coli turns into humans. He explained the rationale for that this session when he told us, oh, we just skipped evolution in high school. So, and he wondered why everyone couldn't do that. And he also told me he educated himself on Wikipedia a little bit before the hearing, so he'd know a little bit about this stuff. So that's where they're coming from. But this is not going to be easy. But as President Kennedy said when he launched our first science revolution, we don't do this because it's easy. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things. not because they're easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, we are unwilling to postpone, and one in which we intend to win. This is not going to be an easy fight. We have an uphill battle, but we're going to keep fighting until we win, because we really have a choice of two futures ahead of us. One, we keep cutting science funding. We just cut $50 billion in the sequester over the next 5 years, $80 billion roughly over 10 years. And this is not in a decade that's been increasing funding. It's in a decade that's been largely stagnant, and we're cutting funding now. So that's going to decimate scientific research and development. And if we don't teach our kids evolution, climate science, modern medicine, that vaccines are good for us, then we're really going to have trouble with these kids when they go into scientific fields. And it's going to hurt even more if we don't fund them. So there's now superbugs because we've used medicine too much that we're going to have to address. In our age of rapid travel, we could have a pandemic break out more easily than we'd like. I mean, even the recent meteorite that exploded over Russia is a sobering reminder of how we might have to address something like that in the future. And if our kids know science, we can face these threats. If our kids don't, we won't. And so this sounds like science fiction, but this is the future we face. And that's why we need a second giant leap. And I want to see, honestly, I see no reason why $1 trillion sounds like a lot of money, but I see no reason why we shouldn't fund $1 trillion for science in a decade. It's reasonable. And the thing about that is it's an investment. You hear a lot about the debt's scary. I got in an argument with Stephen Moore of the Wall Street Journal over this on Bill Maher recently. Where and the key thing he didn't understand was that science is an investment. When I go to college, it's an investment. When I start a company, I take out a loan to start the company because I expect to make money off that. When we invest in science, we expect in 50 years that science is going to, that what we discover is going to help us fuel our economy of the next generation. There's a report that came out recently talking about the Human Genome Project, where, if I remember the numbers correctly, it said we spent $14.5 billion. The US government took in $59 billion in tax revenue, increased tax revenue, from what was generated from what we spent on the Human Genome Project, and we generated nearly $1 trillion of economic activity. So that's a good investment. That's how we pay off our debt. So if that's $14.5 billion, who knows what we could do with $1 trillion? And so we need a second giant leap. And this isn't just me, this isn't just y'all. We need everyone to speak out, to stand up and speak out. Because when I was a high school student, when I was a sophomore in high school, when the Louisiana Science Education Act first passed, I was shy. I didn't know how to speak out. I didn't realize I had a voice, and my voice had power. And I slowly realized after a few years that someone had to stand up for what was right, and eventually I realized it had to be me. And so once I spoke out, it became clear that speaking for the truth and justice and what was right was what mattered. And we need everyone to do that. We need everyone to speak out for more science, to teach good science, to fund science, and join me in calling for a second giant leap. Thank you all so much for being here, and any questions y'all want to have, any questions that I have time for, I'll take.
Thank you very much for coming. I think you did a great job, and I'm proud of you for standing up. And a lot of people say, well, won't somebody do something about this? Well, I'm somebody. So thank you for doing that. I think you used a phrase that this is an American problem or something like that, an American symptom. And I'm wondering if you had experience or heard from other people, other countries that look at America and go, you know, what the hell? And if they had advice on how to address it, I mean, obviously where the biggest problems are the legal system and cultural base, but does the rest of the world have lessons to learn that we can apply here in America?
So the rest of the world, creationism is an American problem. It's also a problem all around. I mean, there's different types of science denial all around the world. And I wouldn't necessarily say I've learned, I mean, I was in Europe recently and they just kept asking me what's wrong with your country. And I'd say, well, we're trying. And so, but I wouldn't say there's necessarily lessons as much as this is addressing in America, I would say has to be done in the way we know how to, which is stop science denial at the local level. stop teaching creationism, and stop the school districts that are teaching creationism. If you're taught in a class, have the student know that A, their rights are being violated, B, that they need to call the ACLU or Americans United or call me or the NCSC or someone and say, this is what's happening, and then be ready to stand up. And it's a really high bar for them to know their rights are being violated, know what to do, and then be brave enough to stand up. But that needs to happen more. We need to start funding science more on a national level, and that, I think, can be addressed through the American political process. And it's a PR campaign on one hand, and it's also legislative, and you do both at the same time. You start changing people's minds while passing the legislation. That's the method we're following, at least.
I think you just answered my question, which was those of us not in the scientific community, if you want to support that idea of funding science, besides voting for politicians that agree, what else can we do? It sounds like you kind of touched on it, ACLU, maybe what else?
So with science, the best thing to do with science funding is grassroots organizing. So you're a scientist, talk to everyone in your lab, get them to call their friends, their family, you do the same, and because it's easy for one person to talk to 5 people. That's good. What's good is if you can get the 5 people to talk to 5 people, and those 5 people, and keep it spreading, because that's how grassroots change really works. And so, if you can make that happen, and get them all to call their congressman, get them to schedule meetings with them, get them to sit down with local legislators about teaching science, for example, and take as much direct action as possible, because that's really what comes down to it. It's really the physical picking up the phone, calling a legislator, picking up the phone, calling a friend, and getting them to call the legislator, showing up for the meeting, showing up for the rally, showing up to testify. And that's what it takes. All right. Oh, you got it.
Yeah, we should feel kind of ashamed of ourselves compared to the Europeans on their outlook on evolution, but there are so many anti-vaxxers in Europe that there's been a measles epidemic. So, it's critical thinking. I think it's the biggest lack, and it's worldwide. Look at the GMOs are banned in European countries for reasons that are not scientific.
No, science denial is a worldwide problem. I mean, that's the plain and simple of it.
Hi, I'm about to be a senior in high school, and creationism isn't taught in my school, but evolution is hardly touched on. And the attitude towards it is very negative. Do you have any advice of anything I could do to take steps to...
So the first question I guess I have for you is is it like we just don't believe that?
Yeah, it's hardly touched on, and they would skip it if they could. And
Okay.
My science teachers are usually Christians.
So, because the first part is if they're doing it on a religious, we don't believe in evolution, that's not right, then that's a problem. That would be, you call the ACLU if they're saying, well, we're Christian, we don't believe this, and so we're not teaching it. If they're not teaching it, it has to match the curriculum. You have to teach what's in the curriculum to prepare your students for graduation and whatever test they have to take. So if they're not teaching what they're required to teach by the state, that's also problematic. And that maybe you send a message to the State Department of Education saying they're not teaching what they're supposed to teach. And if the last problem would be if a curriculum's weak on evolution. Now, next generation science standards, which are adopted in a lot of places, are pretty good on evolution and also on climate change. That's causing some pushback. Like Kansas is now trying to throw them out, their legislature, because it teaches evolution and climate change. But if the standards are good, that's good. If the standards are not good, then you can ask to have the standards changed and try and lobby for that.
So I'm hearing that you have a lot of academics and professionals on board. Have you considered talking to the universities themselves to apply pressure on the school systems by simply saying we will refuse any acknowledgement of your curriculum? You don't get in, period.
So
unless you have a creationist-based curriculum, that we will not accept that as an invalid admission.
So private schools can already do that. Now, private schools, I don't think will come out. We haven't really approached this, but private schools, I don't know if they come out publicly and say that because they can do it, and they just don't want to attract the controversy in case they want to take students from those schools sometimes. But public schools, one court case, a public school system went to court to have the ability to basically say, we don't accept the curriculum from these creationist schools. It was an Association of Christian Schools International versus Stearns. A public university system, the UC system, went to court to say, we don't accept the graduation credits from your high school. We don't think you actually completed high school because your education was subpar, and therefore we don't have to accept you. And they won in court to be able to say that. So this actually exists.
Okay. A House bill recently died in the Representatives. It was House Bill 1674. It was the Scientific Education and Academic Freedom Act. And yeah, what it did was it allowed faith-based explanations to be accepted on tests and stuff. How are we supposed to address this problem when we have politicians that are worried about sending water to Texas, who on their campaign ads, they shoot the water? Like, we are not going to steal our water. I mean, how do we get decent, forbid the term, but politicians instead of businessmen when that's all we have are these faith-based politicians?
So, that's the problem. First, this has to become an issue, which it isn't. There's not really enough mobilization on science because, honestly, on a lot of progressive causes, so we just heard about sex ed. For example, Planned Parenthood is something that has an immediate benefit. If you're being prohibited from getting an abortion, then you might want to go protest today. Science, we may not see the results. The average citizen may not see the results of what happens when we cut science funding tomorrow. We'll see it in years and years. And so there's not mobilization. Or this generation of kids that are taught creationism, they don't know to be mad about it. And so it's not really an issue where there's mobilization like there is on many other issues. And so first we need that. And secondly, we're just dealing with the demographics of this. 46% of Americans by the last Gallup poll think the earth was formed in the last 10,000 years. We just need to change that. And that's really where we start too, is not only trying to change, and we have to keep, think about bad legislations, we just have to keep fighting it and fighting it and fighting it until they stop sponsoring it. Or fighting to repeal it until it's repealed. And it's a rough fight, and like I mentioned earlier, we've had this textbook thing in Louisiana 4 times straight. First, they tried to throw it out our State Board of Education. We won there. They approved good textbooks. And so for the past 3 years now, they've attempted to overturn the State Board of Education's decision in the legislature. And we've stopped it 3 times. It's getting harder every time, which is unfortunate. But we just have to keep getting in there and fighting it. But while we do that, make sure more kids learn evolution, talk to people, make sure they understand understand the scientific method, what real science is, and we just have to make the change gradually. And that's the best we can do.
I have a follow-up to the young lady about the teaching of not teaching evolution in your schools. Well, I'm from Kansas, and we just passed a law that has created what they are calling innovative districts. And there will be 29 innovative school districts that will be exempted from state and federal law regarding education. It was railroaded through, and our governor signed it. It passed overwhelmingly, and I don't know how we go up against something like that when it's hidden very successfully in language that does not specify, but they don't have to now follow state and federal law.
And was that about, because you said you're from Kansas, right?
I'm from Kansas.
And I was following some of the stuff about how your State Board of Education passed NGSS.
Yes.
And then your legislature.
The person who sponsored this bill used to be on the Board of Education when we had the whole evolution debacle in 2006, and he is now one of our state senators.
So was he also the one who was questioning NGSS based on evolution and climate change recently, right?
I'm quite certain.
So what you can do there is now there's a pattern of him being involved in science denial, and you can point that out. That's what we've done in Louisiana. So Senator Ben Nevers, when they're trying to throw out the textbooks, we didn't know what they were trying to do with the textbooks. We just knew Nevers was involved, and they didn't like the biology books. And so they were saying, well, it's just allowing districts more freedom. That was the argument. But we know this guy's been involved in creationism. He said it straight out. They've said the textbooks aren't in line with the Louisiana Science Education Act. It's sort of like, okay, how are they not in line? They don't teach creationism. So we know what their sort of angle is. We could point out, well, they're creationists, and maybe, I mean, the best thing that would, or the best way to fight it is if it comes out like some of these schools are blatantly violating the law and a student stands up and says, I was taught this is wrong. That's the easiest way for it to happen, but there's often a very high bar for that, for a student to be brave enough to stand up, or even know to stand up. And so if that doesn't happen, repeal effort trying to say, we know what they're doing, this is how it works, this is why they're doing it, these are the people involved, and this is what the purpose is, this is what they're using in these schools. And you can also, here's a thought, you can also send a public records request to the schools requesting their curriculum and see what they're teaching there actually, because they have to give that up. And if they're teaching the earth is 6,000 years old, and if they're not, then great, but if they are, that's a problem.
All right, we have a last question, and this actually comes from an Oklahoma public school educator herself. So here she is.
I just wanted to take a minute to the people that are young here that have this problem in school. You're going to be hard pressed to get a teacher that's going to stand up if you're not willing to say, hi ACLU, these people are teaching me nonsense. But you can start a club, and you can find a teacher that will be your advisor. And in a club, I can teach you science in a club, and you can find maybe a business that will fund your club, and you can sort of go in the back door, because you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody that's going to go up against the whole school system that is, you know, God and Jesus. Yeah, if you want to have a club and you don't have a teacher, they have to appoint one. But if you don't have a teacher that's willing to come and teach your evolution and have your evolution club, you don't want that teacher that's going to be appointed. But you will probably know who they are, and you can find them. Talk to other teachers. Talk to the cool teacher and say, who do you think would be willing to be a sponsor or a faculty sponsor for our club? And you'll find somebody.
You want to add any comments to that, Zach?
That's good as it is.
Okay.